بسم الله الحمد لله الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي رب زدني علما. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we send peace and blessings upon our final messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Begin with reciting the ayat for Allah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذ قال يوسف لأبيه يا أبت إني رأيت 11 كوكبا والشمس والقمر رأيتهم لي ساجدين قال يا بني لا تقصص رؤياك على إخوتك فيكيدوا لك كيدا إن الشيطان للإنسان عدو مبين وكذلك يجتبيك ربك ويعلمك من تأويل الأحاديث ويتم نعمته عليك وعلى آل يعقوب كما أتمها على أبويك من قبل إبراهيم وإسحاق إن ربك عليم حكيم. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Just everyone for coming back and joining us in our weekly series titled Unpacking Our Stories, and with a specific focus on Surah Yusuf. Just as we went over last week, we're going to be spending Tuesday nights this semester going over what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls ahsan, the best of what's used, the best of molds, the best of examples, basically, not just the best of stories, but the best of examples for us, and tells it in the best of manners. So our intention of this series is to go through the story of Yusuf alayhi salam as is found in Surah Yusuf, but also for us to hopefully gain insights into each and every one of our individual stories as well as we go through life. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen, in which we'll just have basically the Qur'an with us as we usually do. And last week, what we established is, remember, the best of stories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed. We talked a little bit about why it's in Arabic Qur'an, some of what we can glean from that. And then the idea of when Allah tells a story, that every detail is important. That we can't just say, oh, Allah gave us a detail and that it doesn't give us guidance. Every letter, every grammatical state, there's guidance in it for us. So that's why I got the comment actually last week that you spent an hour talking about 3 ayat. I'm like, yeah, I did. But there's also the idea that we could have spent 9 hours and we probably still wouldn't have exhausted or started scratching the surface of the level of guidance in it. So we're going to take our time with it. I am planning on finishing the entire surah within this semester, but I think, so especially for the first few weeks, we're only going to do 3 or 4 ayat a day. And actually, the way I'm going to be playing it is I divided this surah into 14 scenes, and we're going to try our best to get through 1 or 2 scenes every single week. So today we are either going to get through ayat 3 through 6, or if we're being super productive, we'll get through ayat 3 through 10. So Allahu Alam, we'll see which ones we get through. But I don't want to rush this too much because I think these, again, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put forward that this is ahsan al-qasas, meaning that it's the best of stories. It has the best lessons also for us to take from. So I don't want to try to jump through them too quickly. I want to take our time and have conversations so that we can inshallah benefit from the story of Yusuf alayhi salam in the best possible manner. So with that, the way I was going to do the scene today is I was going to read first the translation and give a basic explanation of what is the content that we're discussing today, and then ayah by ayah go through individual lessons that are in the ayah. If at any point you want to say something, this is meant to be a conversation as well. After I go through, inshallah, the summary of the ayat that we're doing today, feel free to jump in while we're getting into ayah by ayah. What does this bring up for you? What does it say about your own life or your own understanding of story as we go through it? So I'll begin with just the content that we're going through. Ayah 4, 5, and 6. In 4, the typical translation on here is, remember when Yusuf said to his father, "Oh, my dear father, indeed I dreamt of 11 stars and the sun and the moon, and I saw them prostrating to me." So we just want to paint the scene here, though the translation just does it itself. A young boy wakes up, and then presumably the way I imagine it is in the middle of the night, and just goes up to his dad and goes, I saw a really strange dream. And he starts interpreting the dream already, because the way Allah put it forward is, without getting too technical, we'll get into this when we talk about this ayah specifically, which says lisajidin, which means that he thinks that the sun, moon, and stars in his dream are actually people. They're not objects. And he says, I see all of them because of me prostrating. Not prostrating to me, but because of me prostrating. I'll get into why that's there as well. And he's super scared. He's not looking, he never asks his dad a question. He just tells him something that's happening. So already we get, man, this is a strange situation, because typically parents initiate conversations with children. Children don't initiate conversations with parents. And Allah chose to start the story with that. This conversation's got to be super important. And then his father replies, Ya bunayya. His father replies, my beloved son, oh, I love you so much. Important, because normally when we talk to our kids, or when our parents talk to us, they don't say our name. They don't say a title. There's like, you go back to sleep. That type of thing. That's not the relationship here. It's my beloved little son. If I was to translate this into some nickname that maybe your parent has for me, like my mother calls me Pasha and has used to call me Pasha, but it means prince. Like, oh, my little one. Um, don't tell your brothers this story or this dream, because they're gonna they're gonna devise a plot against you. Shaitan is a sworn enemy to humankind. And just like this, your Lord, connecting it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to God already, your Lord then will teach you the names, the interpretation of all speech. That's how I'm going to translate it, and perfect his favor upon you and the descendants of Yaqub, just like he perfected it for our forefathers, Abraham and Isaac, Ibrahim and Ishaq, and Allah is the one who has all knowledge and all wisdom. That's the scene in and of itself that we're going to unpack today. After this, we have the next scene that takes place that when Yusuf alayhi salam's brothers do find out. We're going to shift scenes into his brothers. But I almost want this as like a camera angle. Like, you know how when a director is directing a movie, that like there's cuts that you see? This is all one cut. That it would go from Yusuf alayhi salam waking up, turning to his father, to the father having this conversation. And I want us to like now read into each and every kind of component of this. And the first part to just comment on is even that this is happening. And why I say that is we almost, this is proof that the Qur'an is not a book of history. I sometimes teach Muslim history. Like some of you have taken in study circle before a survey of Muslim history that we went through. And one of the things I like opening that course with is saying that Muslim history is different than Islamic history. Muslim history tells you conquests, names of rulers, trade routes, these type of things, because that's what history generally captures. The Quran doesn't have history, because you know what history would never capture? A boy waking up scared after seeing a dream and talking to his father. There is no history book in history, that would capture that detail. But that's where Allah chooses to start. This is probably not the only conversation Joseph has ever had, Yusuf alayhi salam has ever had with his father. But this is the one that Allah chooses to capture. Why? Because it ended up being the most significant conversation in Yusuf alayhi salam's life. And here I already start off with, you don't get to choose which conversation you have that is going to be impactful. What I mean by that is, I highly doubt Yaqub alayhi salam knew what was about to go down, that this is amongst the last time he's going to talk to his son. He doesn't know that. Yusuf alayhi salam doesn't know that. But why does Allah start with this conversation? Because this would be the one that defined the rest of his life. And we're going to see that today. Is it's going to change that? And I think for you and I, this is also a huge lesson to take away right from the get-go. You don't know what impact you are going to have or the next action is going to have. This is like a huge theological component for each and every one of us is you don't know what your last deed is going to be. Not only that, you don't know what your best deed is going to be. It could be the simplest thing. And I want us to zoom out a lot here is from this scene, Yusuf alayhi salam, from all intents and purposes that we know of, he never talks to his father again. But And he has the worst possible environment to grow up in for the rest of his life. Think about it. He becomes a slave. He lives in a politician's house. Great environment there, right? Like all the hypocrisy, all of the problems that he had. And also, he's a slave. So no one is taking care of him. And what I mean by that is when you're with your parents try to sometimes successfully and sometimes unsuccessfully at least censor the world around you, make you exposed to good things rather than bad things. He's a slave in a politician's house. First of all, there's scandals and stuff that go on in politicians' house all the time, and no one cares about him because he's a slave. He can do whatever he wants. Yet he gets raised to be an amazing human being who everyone who interacts with him literally looks at him and goes, this kid's got character. Where did all of that come from? Actually, from little tiny conversations like this. That's how much impact they had. I'm going to give a quick disclaimer here. How I actually prepared for today is I've just been thinking about these ayats for the last couple of days and just been running them over in my head over and over again. Why did God choose this detail? Why this detail? And one of the things I wanted to make sure that I mentioned as a disclaimer before we get too far into this, we're going to talk a lot about good parenting today. I don't want any of you to start thinking, my parents never did that. This is why I am terrible, quote unquote. This is why am justified in doing whatever I want to. I don't want us to do that. One, because it doesn't do us any good. And two, there's two sides to every coin. It takes a good parent and a good child who responds well to what the parents have done. What I really want us to do today is recognize what Allah praises about the situation of Yusuf and Yaqub and attribute some of the good that maybe we never saw in our parents and start appreciating it now. And on the flip side, recognizing I wasn't a great son or daughter. My parents did do something for me, but I wasn't as receptive as Yusuf was. Does that make sense? This is not to point fingers at our parents. This is for us to recognize how we can, inshallah, be good older siblings, be good mentors, and how we were terrible mentees. I hope that that's clear. Because I think a lot of name blaming can go on here, and I'm just going to put it out there. I work as a counselor of sorts, and one of the things I hear over and over again, and I think I'm not saying it's inappropriate to do so, because I think it's therapeutic to oftentimes get things off of our chest, and I think that's valuable. But I hear all the time that I'm like this because my father never showed me love. My mother never let me choose anything. This happened, this happened. And I think as much as I'm not taking that away from anyone, I think that those are valid reasons why maybe the best development situation or the best environment wasn't created. I'm not taking that away. But what I am saying is, I think to do that with stories in the Qur'an might be problematic, because the Qur'an is always supposed to lead us to proper conduct. And it's better for us to use the other approach, the humble approach of, okay, these are things I can pick up from it rather than pointing fingers because of it. I'm hoping that makes a little bit of sense. And I hope that disclaimer makes sense. Disclaimer over. But this beautiful environment in which this child just tells his father, Dad, I saw a dream, and I was really scared of this dream. This is the sunnah that we need to revive. And I would encourage those of you that have siblings, maybe start there. Those of you who are married, maybe do this. My wife and I have a tradition where every morning when we wake up, we share what dream we had with each other. But because it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of intimacy between two people to share dreams with each other. But that's what this young boy had with his father. And what's also strange about this is he initiates the conversation, his father doesn't. Almost any other place in the Qur'an, we have a lot of conversations that of children and parents in the Qur'an, by the way, but almost every other place, the father initiates it with the child. Luqman tells his children. Yaqub later on will tell his children. He'll gather them. But Yusuf alayhi salam initiates the conversation with his father. That's a rare thing, because I'm going to be honest with you, as a parent, I can tell you, it's because most conversations that children initiate are not worthy. And I don't mean that in a way of like diminishing the conversation, because if anything, I'm going to give you the opposite. They're super important, but I'm saying they're almost nonsensical. My daughter today stopped me and told me about green clouds and yellow clouds and purple ones, but the blue ones are the best and they're her favorite because from the blue ones there's sometimes rain. It doesn't really make sense. That was the whole thing. That was the conversation. Most of the time when children tell you about their conversations, it's really, really hard to relate them and make any sense of it. But Allah captures what a great father, what a great environment that Yaqub had for his children, that he sees a dream that he's really freaked out of. And the first response he gets is, let me tell my father, yeah, abati. But also there's the beautiful thing about this is it's not just a child that tells their father anything, but it captures within it, yeah, abati, my loving father. It's a respectful, loving title. He calls his father by like, I see this as like, Baba, by like a very endearing type of thing. Didn't just tell him. The child is respectful yet close. We typically have two extremes. Either you have a relationship with your parent that is so freaked out that as soon as dad comes home, everyone needs to pretend like they're doing productive things. Why? Because God forbid our dad caught us resting. Like that's one situation. And then the other one is there's no respect whatsoever of like, I don't even have to think about before I talk to my parents. I don't have to do anything. Why? I don't give them any respect. I've always, not criticizing here, but I've always found it weird when people call their parents by their first names. It's just a bit odd to me. I know that's a cultural thing. That's just me being judged, but I've always found that kind of odd. And I see the opposite of that taking place. He gives his child a title, but it's cute the other way around too, where the parent has a nickname for the child as well. But there's this beautiful kind of relationship. Yeah, Abati, my father who I love so much. That's the first point I have. Anyone, I've been talking for a while. I told you guys this would be a discussion. Anyone else on that first kind of just initial, even before the conversation takes place, and he just calls his
I have a slightly unrelated question.
dad?
You're not supposed to share bad dreams, right?
We're going to have a lot of conversations about dreams throughout the Surah Yusuf because because dreams take such a central role in this story. So we're going to talk about this many times, inshallah. But to answer that question, you're not supposed to share bad dreams in an initial type of way. Meaning that if you had a bad dream once, you don't share it. If you've continuously been seeing a bad dream, sometimes it's a good idea to share it to help you process it. Does that make sense? But if you just randomly saw a bad dream, no, you don't really share
Also, I never said assalamu alaikum. Alaikum.
it. Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. I hope that makes sense, Madia. Anyone else about this initial scene?
Yeah, I was just gonna comment. Oh, assalamu alaikum. I
Walaikum
was
salam.
just gonna comment on Yusuf alayhi salam's initiative to go to his dad. You know, that indicates that he had a, very clearly trusting, loving relationship because he didn't go to his brothers or, I'm sure he had some kind of friends. He didn't go to them. So he understood at that age that there are some people he can trust more than others, especially because dreams are such a, precious asset of sorts. So he knew that he could go to his father and, clearly based on the indication, I mean, the interactions here, they had a very loving, trusting, respectful relationship, which isn't very pervasive in, modern parent and child bonds. So that, and then also later on, we see that when his father tells him, don't tell your brothers, he takes advice into consideration and doesn't tell his brothers. He actually listens to his father, which again, that's not, I mean, he could have gone against his dad. You don't have to agree with what your parents are saying, but he knew that what my father was saying was going to be the most beneficial for me.
Yeah. SubhanAllah, I'm actually going to add one point to that, and that is that it you don't start with sharing dreams. I'm sure what this looked like is he shared a bunch of things, and each time his father responded positively. So of course, in this case, he's going to share a dream and he's going to respond positively. And the other part of this is, I know I mentioned this in a weird way where I said like when kids tell you something, it almost never makes sense. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense in their part, but it almost makes no sense to share it with anyone else. And what I mean by that is, um, you have to listen to kids when they talk to you because I'm going to tell you as a father of very young children, that like when they got the courage to speak about it, it means a lot to them. Like I have never, as much as when I tell you guys a story of my daughter, it makes no sense to you. When I hear it, I'm supposed to be like, that's the most beautiful thing I heard today.
That makes sense. I mean, that's how you establish that bond. Sometimes I literally just sit there and rant to my father. I say the stupidest things, and he just sits there and then actually comments based on what I'm saying. So I know he's actually listening to me and reflecting on what I'm saying. And I've always really appreciated him for that because it does take a lot of courage to go to a parent and just literally talk about school, classmates, literally anything. And for them to not just kind of nod, but to actually ponder and sit there and reflect on what you're saying, that takes a lot of courage on their end, especially when what you're saying doesn't make sense at all. Which, yeah, I mean, it's mashallah, it's awesome that your daughter does that, especially at such a young age. Shows that she's building their relationship.
My job when she tells me about the different colored clouds and she likes the blue ones, I have to say no, but I like why not the yellow ones? The yellow one might have sunbeams, right? Like that's my job to do in that moment. It doesn't make sense to other people. So it's weird to narrate it, but what I'm supposed to do is what have I gleaned about my daughter based on what she has just told me? And this doesn't just apply to your children. This also applies to like anyone who you have to mentor in any way. This is your siblings when they tell you something. This is a random kid at the masjid when they tell you something. A random kid wherever like anytime you're in a situation where you are being a mentor, if they've had the courage to speak, you should have the courage to listen. And listening properly oftentimes means expounding. So putting that out there, I'm going to now jump into what he actually says. And what he actually says is beautiful. And we can go really deep with this, or we can do the surface level. I want to go a little bit deeper than I typically do when I talk about this story, just because I'm super excited. He goes first, yeah, but we've already established he's a really cool, like he respects his father. Inni ra'aytu, indeed or I keep seeing, or I really saw. Part of this tells me when he says inni, Allah says inni or when it's like verily. But when a kid says it, I don't think a kid is saying verily I saw. I see it as more of I really did see. Like there's a degree of nervousness there. Ra'aytu ahada ashara kawkaban, 11 stars. I'm going to get into the order a little bit in a second, but it doesn't make any sense to start with stars. Why? Because think about how children, I know we can say through our understanding of no, sometimes stars are huge, but a child, if you asked a child, what's bigger, the sun, the moon, or the stars? What would they typically say? The sun's going to be the biggest, the moon next, and then the stars. Like that's how a child is supposed to think. I know you and I are like, no, but there are certain stars that are like huge. Yeah, I get it. You know supernovas. Good job. Going with like a 7-year-old here. He starts with stars. I saw 11 stars. Washamsa wal qamara. After that, it makes sense. The sun and the moon. You normally say the sun and the moon. You don't say the moon and the sun. And then he says again, Ra'aytuhum, I really saw them. I saw them. He said I saw them twice already. So I really saw them. Li, it says to me here. I'm going to translate that as for me, and we'll get into why. Sajidin, prostrating. And he uses the animate form of sajidin, meaning that he's making the 11 stars, the sun and the moon, as people rather than as celestial objects. Because normally in Arabic, there's a way of doing there's a way of putting forward of plurals, and a feminine plural would never use a sajidin, there would be sajidat. But again, if you don't get the grammar, don't worry about it. Just know that this kid is smart in the way he's describing it. He's already interpreting the dream. And it's obvious that he knows what it means. Why? Because this kid's smart. He's got 11 brothers and he's got a father and a mother. So like he knows what this is, and his father knows that this kid knows as well. But what is he freaked out at? That ra'aytuhum li sajidin. How do we know that? Because he says ra'aytuhum again. I saw them. I saw them prostrating to me. So this is the part that surprises them. What doesn't surprise him is 11 stars, the sun and the moon. Okay, I saw them, but I saw them prostrating. That's how he's saying this to his father. He's already super intelligent. I know we've all been through the story before. We know how Yaqub alayhi salam responds, but I want to actually delve a little bit deep here. The first question I have to ask is, why stars? I know when we think about dream interpretation, again, we're going to talk about dreams a lot throughout the next couple of weeks, but that symbols have meanings, but Allah could have used anything. Allah could have used like 11 fruits and a tree and a flower. Allah, like, wouldn't the same thing be accomplished as like 10 sheeps and a tiger and a lion? Like, there could have been so many other things that could represent the symbol. Why stars? And this is what I've been able to glean. I'm actually curious to see what you guys can glean from this. But I see this as stars because it's the relationship that they have to each other. The way I see it is, if Yusuf alayhi salam sees his brothers as stars and his parents as the sun and the moon, he probably sees, that means it's not written, but that probably means he sees himself as the earth. So there's already some problems here of like cool imagery here, where the stars beautify your life. The stars are a source of guidance, but not always guidance. And to me, that's like how siblings are, right? Siblings aren't completely dependent on you. Siblings sometimes can decorate it, sometimes you ignore them completely, but they're always there. They're always like stars that are there as guidance for you, whether you're using them or they're not, but they're there. But they represent beauty, and sometimes they seem close and sometimes they seem far away. But what really gets me is the sun and the moon. The sun revolves, or we revolve around the sun, and the moon revolves around us. And the reason I think this is so significant, you could go as far as to like that's a mother and a father, but I don't want to go that far. I actually want to just say something along the lines of this: parents and children's relationships are kind of beautiful, aren't they? That when you're a child, your world revolves around your parents, right? Like they just, the big example I can give is I have a 6-month-old child right now, Ayub, and like if he hears your voice, he's like his world just, where's Mama? And like he just wants to stare at you. And like randomly, if you're paying attention to anything else, he'll do whatever he can to just get you to look at him, and then he'll give you that smile. Like that's his whole world. It's almost as if his world revolves around you. But then I'm going to imagine this will eventually take place, and I'm starting to see it already with my daughter a little bit, where I want her attention all the time. It's as children get older and older, the kids start ignoring their parents, and now the parents want their kids. You start off being the what? You start off, your parents are the sun to you, but eventually the parents become the moon for you, where you are the reason they move. And I find that imagery to be so beautiful that that's found. And one of the reasons that, in my opinion, Yusuf alayhi salam, he's already interpreting it, but it's such a shock to him is he's actually making these connections, and he's just like, I see this happening, and what part of this makes me think is sometimes right now we're all close, but we might be far away, but then we're going to be close again. That's what happens in his story, right? They're all together, and then they go far away. Just like imagine what happens in orbits. From the angle you see in orbit, you can't see the sun and the moon anymore, and the stars look like they're far away, but then they get close together again. Li sajidin. Because of me, they're close again. He's already putting out basically his whole life story. That like my relationship to my siblings, to you all, is about to change, and that's what's freaking me out about this. There's so much in this just simple couple of words that he says, and I find that just to be so unique. I'm hoping you guys are following what's going on here. Any comments before we delve into a kind of his response? But any comments more about that dream?
It's interesting because Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
It's interesting because they didn't in the 6th century they didn't know about orbits, so it's interesting how, or did they? I don't think so.
Depends on who you ask, but the general accepted narrative is no, they didn't.
So I mean, in that case, I just think it's interesting that we can glean some information from new knowledge. That's one, the sort of reflection I have.
Mm-hmm.
The other reflection that I had was I don't actually, I'm blanking, but I have a funny story where we were going through the story of Yusuf alayhi salam for Saturday school, and then one of the questions, which it's a good question, it was how do the sun and the moon and the stars prostrate? And then that's a good question. And then their follow-up question is like, do they roll? Is that how they do it?
Good question. The way I see it is when they come close together and then when they go far away. At least, but this could be just my own like 21st century approach to it because we understand orbits. But like, wouldn't that look like prostration when they come close? Like, think about it when the planets align versus when they're scattered and all over the place. I personally think he saw the planets align and he's like, they're prostrating. And I'm in the middle.
I remember I had it's when we were talking about inni ra'aytu, the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used inni. I think like at some point, like many of us have probably had dreams that we've like thought were just so real, that we all thought were just so like they're as if they were real life. That's the kind of what happened. That's kind of what's coming to mind when I hear inni ra'aytu.
SubhanAllah. Yeah. Anyone else? Any reflections on this ayah before we get into ayah number 5?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Ryan.
So do we know how old Yusuf alayhi salam was at this time?
That's a really good question. From my understanding, we can guesstimate based on the next time his age is described. The next time his age is described, he's put forward as about 12. So this would be a few years prior. So most people think it's like 7 or 8. I heard someone else had unmuted. My apologies for not catching you.
It's okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
I actually thought that the fact that the dream was shown in a perspective of like planets and stars kind of shows like the status of the whole entire family and where Yusuf alayhi salam and his like whole entire family is according to like I guess Allah's list.
SubhanAllah. Yeah, that's actually really cool as well. That why would you use these celestial objects? Because what's more valuable than the sun, moon, and stars? And that's how he sees them. We'll talk about this a lot more. I'm really excited to talk about dreams with you guys. But the symbols that represent for dreams, that says as much about Yusuf alayhi salam as it says about the guidance that he gets from them. He thinks the world of his brothers. Why? Because he sees them as the stars. I think that's like a really cute and like we sometimes like to paint like there's this terrible sibling rivalry where like he disrespected them and they respected him. No, he thinks the world of his brothers. Why? He saw them as stars.
I'm reminded of Surah Al-Alaq, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يَنْهَى. So, or as in, I actually don't remember the exact translation, but it's like, don't you see, it's something along the lines of, don't you see if they were on guidance? Like, as in, yeah, so the brothers are about to do something. So the brothers are, they are going to not do the best things in the story. And it's just interesting how maybe Yusuf alayhi salam, even maybe he notices this in his brothers, but he still sees the best in them.
Yeah. SubhanAllah, yeah. And I think that's beautiful. It's have you seen the one who denies Abdan idha salla, the one who my servant who prays أرأيت إن كان على الهدى. Could you see if he was on guidance? أو أمر بالتقوى, or if he had taqwa in his heart, how amazing he would have been. Yeah, that's kind of found here as well. Like they're stars. They really are stars, regardless of what they're about to do to you. Part of how I also want us to understand this is because of this conversation that's about to take place, Yusuf alayhi salam is going to be able to do what he does at the end of his story. You know what happens at the end of his story, right? He forgives his brothers. It's beautiful. How does he do that? Because here is when he set what his brothers are. His brothers are stars. No matter how much they hurt you, they're stars that Allah put in your life. Treat them like stars. I think there's a beautiful notion of kind of how we're supposed to treat our siblings and not just siblings, any unconditional relationship that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in our lives. I know it's hard. And many people, as people go through terrible abuse, and I'm not saying that there's no such thing as familial abuse. There definitely is. If anything, the next ayah is about to confirm that. But he sees them as stars, and obviously that's an ideal way of looking at them as well. But moving on, I'm gonna get into it. We're about halfway done. We're about halfway done with our time, and like a fifth way through the lessons I wanted to get through today. Um, so next, his dad now responds. قال يا بني, oh my beautiful child. If I was to translate this in like how I would speak to my daughter, मेरी प्यारी गुड्डी, my beautiful little munchkin, my like the apple of my eye, my little like that's really what's being said here when you say bunayya. It's a very excessive way of calling your child. It's not yeah bani. It's not yeah like yeah walad boy. It's not one of those. It's yeah bunayya. Like you indulge your child with a bunch of love. So that's already there. Beautiful relationship. The first thing he says is actually quite interesting. لا تقصص رؤياك على إخوتك. Don't tell your dream to your brothers. فيكيدون لك كيدا, because they might plot a plot against you. This gets weird. Some people might look at this and be like, is Yaqub alayhi salam sowing the seeds of distrust between him and his brothers? And here I have to just say, the primary thing we should be worried about, especially when we're talking about rearing children, is harm prevention. What I mean by that, and there's no way of being politically correct about this, so just bear with me, is your child was on guidance. They're on fitrah. Your job is to make sure their fitrah, this God-given guidance to them, is not corrupted. That's your job. That actually supersedes educating them. Protecting them supersedes educating them. But sometimes educating them means protecting them. So father is not afraid to say, oh, can I tell them about the brothers? And like, I should protect them from the real world, right? No, that's not it. He needs to know he lives in the real world. And you know what happens in the real world? People get jealous. Your brothers, you think the world of them. His father's also really smart, so keep that in mind. You see your brothers as stars, and that's beautiful. I actually would assume if he had said something along the lines of, I see comets and the sun and the moon, like something negative, he would have been like, hey, pay more attention to your brothers, like give them more status than that. But he sees his brothers as stars. So he's like, your brothers, I know you love them, but you need to be careful. And this can get into a huge lesson of again, I feel like I'm kind of biased on this just because I work as a counselor, and I sometimes get to see the inner realities of families more than most people see them. Like the amount of stories I've heard of like an uncle who does something to a child, and I'm not going to shy away from this, in like cases of domestic abuse or cases of sexual abuse. And the worst part about it is they had done it before. Like something happened to another sibling, something happened to another family member, and then it happens again. Like people knew about it, but they never told the people who were potentially going to be harmed. Why? Because, oh, we're going to ruin the family name. Your actual family member is more important than the family name. And that's what seems to be established by Yaqub of your brothers. You think the world of them? Good, but don't tell them. Why? Because they might plot, and he even tells him the why. He doesn't just say, yeah, I know better than you. He doesn't say that. He says they might do something to harm you. They might have a plot against you. But then he stops one short of, but don't blame them. Inna shaytana lil insana aduwwun mubin. Shaitan is a clear enemy for people. It's not your brothers. It's not necessarily their fault, but this is the reality you find yourself in. He wants to protect his child. And that's what we should want to do as well, is protect those that we're put in charge of from harm, and not worry about sometimes like what will people say, what will the rest of the family think, what will this happen, what's going to happen if Yusuf Aisam got hurt, and he does get hurt. But when he gets hurt, he never loses hope in his father. Why? Because his father had warned him. And I think this is something that I think it needs to be just mentioned over and over again. And I deal with this when I deal with survivors of domestic abuse or survivors of sexual abuse. What hurts them even more is when someone knew and they didn't tell me. I see this sometimes in marriage situations where the family members knew that this child had a problem or this person had a problem. And when the potential a spouse or the fiance at that point asked, hey, do I need to know anything? They're like, no, they're perfect. And then once they start finding out all of these flaws of their spouse, they're like, no one told me. If someone would have told me, I could have been more prepared. So you start developing a distrust of everyone around that area. Why? Because who can I trust now? No one who had the information told me anything. And you start having a very mistrusting person versus Yusuf alayhi salam. He's not mistrusting. He, even though his siblings turn against him, he's still a trusting person. He's still, when he interacts with people, he opens up to them and they open up to him, to the point where his friends in prison are telling him their dreams. That tells you that there's a degree of trust that he builds from person to person. This didn't destroy him. And I want to say one of the reasons it didn't destroy him is even though he did suffer the consequences, his brothers still throw him down a well and sell him to slavery, right? But because his father had warned him, there was this idea of like, my father's a good guy. And he told me, don't blame them, blame Shaitan for it. He doesn't lose that trusting kind of relationship. And part of that is because people kept the trust with him. His father didn't prevent his brothers from doing anything wrong, but his father did warn Yusuf alayhi salam, and that's valuable because we're talking about saving him psychologically. That's what his father does. Even though we could make the argument he failed, right? Because he didn't save him physically. No, he didn't, because he saved him psychologically. And I think that's a beautiful moment of why him stopping him, or him telling him in this moment. Anyone else?
One thing that this sorry to interrupt, but one thing this makes me think of is like last weekend during R2R, someone asked about like, is it necessary to forgive people and how hard it could be to forgive people. And sometimes like when I think of people who have like crossed me or have insulted me or whatever, like it could be hard to like forgive them, but keeping in mind that Shaitan is the sworn enemy and not necessarily the person who did the insulting is the enemy. They're being inflicted by their nafs or by desires or by their ego or whatever. So I feel like that could, make it easier to have them come back into your heart if you just keep in mind that Shaitan is the enemy. Even with the self too, if like someone's beating themselves up, it's Shaitan who's the enemy. It's not your own self who's your enemy.
Yeah, and Yusuf alayhi salam completely along with that, he completely internalizes this message. And one of the ways we know is one of the proofs of that he internalizes this message is at the end he's able to forgive them. He never thinks his brothers are evil. And there's a reason why Zishan and I were having this conversation earlier today, where one of the things that we really appreciate is this was given to the Prophet ﷺ in the year of sadness. When he's physically suffering, his wife has passed away, his uncle has passed away. Like, this is a very difficult moment for him. And Allah reveals the story because in this story is going to be the same story as of the Prophet ﷺ. And what Zishan and I were talking about is, what the best tafsir of Surah Yusuf is actually the seerah of Muhammad. If you want to understand deeply the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, look at the story of the Prophet ﷺ. Yusuf alayhi salam gets what? Betrayed by his brothers. And eventually he becomes a powerful force in Egypt and he controls their fate. The Prophet ﷺ is kicked out of Mecca by his brothers, the Quraysh. Eventually he overpowers them and has the ability to doing whatever he wants to them. And what does the Prophet ﷺ choose to recite as he's entering Mecca? La tathriba alaykum al-yawm. There is no animosity upon you today. The exact same thing that the surah ends with. Prophet ﷺ's life is the tafsir of Surah Yusuf as well. And we'll get into that little by little every single week as well. Jazakallah, and I really appreciate that you shared that. Just because we only have 15 minutes left, I'm going to get to the next portion, the final speech of this scene. And this is, in my opinion, it's both the longest ayah of the three ayat we have today, and also hits on some of the most profound lessons. Yaqub alayhi salam tells Yusuf alayhi salam then, وَكَذَلِكَ يَجْتَبِيكَ رَبُّكَ. This right here is going to be also therapy 101. So anyone who wants to learn how to be a good counselor, a good mentor, the lessons found here are just super, super amazing. I'm going to give the overview first, and then I'm going to jump into each part because it's so important. Yaqub's response was first, what do you immediately do? And that's found in ayah number 5. Don't tell your brothers. Ayah number 6, وَكَذَلِكَ يَجْتَبِيكَ رَبُّكَ وَيُعَلِّمُكَ مِنْ تَأْوِيلِ الْأَحَادِيثِ. And this is how your Lord is choosing you and will teach you the interpretation of all interactions and will bestow his favor upon you, on our family, the future. So what do we have so far? The present, the future, just as he perfected it upon your forefathers, Ibrahim, Ishaq. The past. What does a good therapist do? And if you go to a therapist and they don't do this, I don't want to say like you have a bad therapist, but maybe. A therapist will be able to give you advice on what to do in the moment or allow you to process how to deal with the moment, will give you an idea or a trajectory or encourage you to think about the future while unpacking and processing the past. That's therapy 101. Someone walks in and there's not been a conversation on these 3 things, you're not getting your money's worth. Sorry to put it in that way, but like, because that's what you're supposed to do. And that's what his father does. He starts with the present, the very immediate thing. This is what needs to happen. But then he doesn't stop there. Because if he stopped there, Yusuf alayhi salam has no motivation. Why should I do this? Why would I do this? Why would my brothers do this? He actually gives him the rest of it in this ayah. And just like that, and with this, يَجْتَبِيكَ رَبُّكَ, your Lord has chosen you, or is choosing you. It's actually in the present tense. It's not, this isn't over yet. You've just started it. The way I see this is Yaqub alayhi salam. Yaqub alayhi salam is a smart father. We already got this by the way he's responding, but a smart father probably predicted already that this child is special. He's really cool. And some of the ways we know this also is Yusuf alayhi salam later on in the story, the Al-Aziz, or that minister, sees him in a slave market, buys him, and apparently from the slave market to the walk home, he realized this kid is special enough for us to do what? When he goes to his wife, akrimi mathwahu, make his stay honorable, because maybe we'll adopt him as a son. Apparently, Yusuf alayhi salam, in that walk from the market to the house, was able to impress him so much that he's going to go from slave to possibly a son. So if that's what a random person was able to figure out, the Yaqub alayhi salam definitely knew how special this kid is already. So he already knew that Yusuf is going to be a prophet beforehand. But what he tells Yusuf is, oh, so this is how Allah chose you. I knew you were going to be a prophet, but now we both know how Allah is telling you you're a prophet. وَكَذَلِكَ يَجْتَبِيكَ. And he uses the term يَجْتَبِيكَ. There are 3 words in Arabic for choosing, or 3 generally used words in the Qur'an for choosing. Let me rephrase it that way. There's ikhtiyar, which is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses for Musa alayhi salam. When Musa alayhi salam is chosen as a prophet, Allah says, أَخْتَخِيرُكَ. I have chosen you, and it has ikhtiyar. You can even hear it. It has khair, or good in it, right? Ikhtiyar, khair. And that's supposed to be, Musa alayhi salam didn't think he was good. But Allah says, no, you're good. I chose you for your good. Istakhiruka, right? That's one word, ikhtiyar. The second word is istifa, to choose someone for their purity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Maryam alayhi salam and says, istafiki, that we have chosen you, Maryam, all over from everyone else. Why? Because of her purity. That's one way of looking at it. And also, istifa means I chose purely out of my choice. Meaning that someone asked me, why did you wear gray today? I'm like, because I wanted to. That would be like istifa. Why? It's like, I get to make the choice of what color to wear. Like that's my choice. Like you guys don't get to dictate that. So that's istifa, right? That's the other type of choosing. Because it's purely based on the one who wants it. Ijtiba'a, the third form that is being used here, comes from jabwa. Jabwa is a choice you make because of the unique characteristics of someone. Why did you choose that person? Because they can get the job done. They have the qualities to get the job done. This type is different because this connotates responsibility with it. It's not an honor, it's responsibility. Does that make sense? So when he says كَذَلِكَ يَجْتَبِيكَ, this isn't a straight up praise of like, you're so awesome and you're going to be really special in life and all that. No, this is Allah has chosen you because of your characteristics. What this also means is Allah's gonna really, you need to prove your worth. That's found in ijtabika. Why? You have amazing skills that are needed. That's why you have them. This is I'm gonna reference two comic books here. So or two like geeky references. This is the Uncle Ben with great power comes great responsibility talk. This is what's happening, like Spider-Man wise. Why? Because كَذَلِكَ يَجْتَبِيكَ رَبُّكَ. Your Lord has chosen you. وَيُعَلِّمُكَ مِنْ تَأْوِيلِ الْأَحَادِيثِ, and will teach you the meaning of everything, of every interaction. But he says, "Ijtabika, you're going to have to do something with this power. And what are you going to have to do with this power? Bring about blessings for all of us, for yourself, and for all of us. And you're going to be on the path of Abraham and Isaac before you." The path of Abraham, is that a simple path? No, he's probably heard stories of like, oh yeah, he was thrown in a fire. Yusuf alayhi salam, does he get thrown somewhere? Yeah, he gets thrown in a well. He has to leave his town. Yeah, Yusuf alayhi salam, yeah, he has to leave town. He has to go from one place to another. And then he gets thrown into prison. Ibrahim alayhi salam's wife gets thrown into prison. Like there's so many parallels that are found. You're gonna have to go through all that. But guess what? Yajtabika, which means what? You have the qualities. You have the ability of getting through every test that's thrown at you because Allah is choosing you. Yusuf alayhi salam was told from this moment, whatever trial you get through, Allah chose you. Allah has a plan for you to get through all of this. You're not just going to be alone. Allah has chosen you for it. That's found with ijtiba'a. And why this is important for us to realize is this is parenting 101. Your parents who like just realize that their child is talented and just keep telling their child, you're talented, you're talented, you're talented. That leads to a child being like arrogant, and that leads to a spoiled child. There's nothing worse than a spoiled child. And I think we as a society see this all over the place, where like child stars, they tend to become sometimes they get better over time, but like they go through this weird growing up period where they think they're invincible and they do stupid stuff. People who get fame too early, like we have a name for them. That's literally like childhood stars. They're brats. Like everyone just looks at them like, oh my gosh. When you get through drugs, prison, and therapy, then maybe we'll respect you again. But like it's just understood that they're going to go crazy at some point. That's not what's being done here. Immediately, it's being linked to what? Responsibility. Allah chose you for something, and this is going to lead to quite a bit. And immediately saying not also the other issue that sometimes people make is if they see a talented child, they want to immediately tell people about it. Why? Because they feel like it's a feather in their hat. They feel like, ooh, my accomplishment. Look, my child is so smart. He's on the honor roll. My child is so smart. He got into med school. My child is so smart, blah, blah, blah. Insert whatever you want here. Yaqub alayhi salam doesn't do that. He says, I didn't choose you. It's not because of me. Allah chose you. You're going to be responsible. Rabbuka. You're responsible to your Lord, not to me. He takes himself out of the equation. Yu'allimuka, Rabbuka yu'allimuka. Your Lord will teach you. My job is almost done here. He doesn't know that this might be the last conversation he has with his child, but this is representative of the conversations he has with this child. He always recognizes you're not going to be with me forever, but you're going to be with Allah forever. And Allah will be teaching you. And Allah has already started teaching you. Yu'allimuka min ta'wil al-ahadith. The true meaning of all occurrences. I know I've been talking for a while, but I want to just complete this ayah, inshallah. There's a misnomer that we think, what's the miracle of Yusuf alayhi salam? That he could interpret dreams. It wasn't just interpreting dreams. Dreams, we're going to talk about this like crazy later on. There's not a single psychological discipline that doesn't value dreams. Whether you're looking at the psychoanalytical approach, the Freudian approach, cognitive behavioral therapy, dream interpretation is a huge part of understanding how people are. So that's part of his gift. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say ru'ya, ta'wil ru'ya, the interpretation or the true meaning of dreams. He says of ahadith. Hadatha is to occur. Ahadith would be quite literally of all types of occurrences, meaning someone would say something and they're saying something with their lips, but Yusuf alayhi salam is able to look at their body language and realize that's not what they mean. Someone will write something and some others will be like, oh my gosh, it's just a humble person. Yusuf alayhi salam will be able to look at it and be like, dude, those are signs of arrogance. And that makes a lot of sense that Allah will be teaching him that, because just think about also from a practical level what Yusuf alayhi salam goes through. Yusuf alayhi salam, right now he's he's a farmer. That's what his family is, right? He gets sold as a slave. So he's going to understand the street life. And then he gets put into the house of what? Politician. If there's anyone who doesn't say what they mean, it's politicians. They say one thing in a press conference, they say one thing in public, and then what happens in their private life? Something else happens. The families of politicians, the people who walk in, sometimes criminals walk in, sometimes this happens, sometimes this happens. And Yusuf Islam is there and seeing all of it, and he's almost a fly on the wall. Why? Because he's a slave, no one cares. You can say whatever you want because he has no power. So everyone says whatever they want around him. He's getting an education of everything. And then what happens? He gets thrown in prison. I'm going to use a Batman reference here, but what happens in Batman Begins, I lived like them, but I never became like them. Why does Batman go in the Batman Begins, the latest one, or the last reboot? Anyway, going to Christian Bale. He goes and he pretends to be a criminal for a while because he wants to try to understand them. Yusuf alayhi salam goes through that, but not by choice. But he tries to understand the minds of criminals, quote unquote. He goes through this. And then he eventually becomes a minister, so he knows how to deal with people with power as well. He literally understands every facet of society. The simple people, farmers, slaves, politicians, criminals, leaders. He understands the motivations of every single one. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, this is how we makkanna Yusuf al-ard. This is how we established Yusuf on the ard. And he actually says that 3 times in this story. The first time is when he gets thrown in a well. The second time is when he goes to prison. And the third time when he becomes a minister. All of them was Allah establishing Yusuf on the earth. And that all of that is Allah teaching him ta'wil al-ahadith, the real deep meaning of all occurrences. Yusuf alayhi salam is going to get that education from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Yaqub alayhi salam is already telling him that. So Yusuf alayhi salam, every time he goes through a challenge in life, he remembers that my dad told me that Allah is going to teach you everything. Allah is going to teach you the true meaning of everything. And he has that to look forward to. And I think that's such a beautiful part of the story. That's what his father gave to him. And what this even comes down to is this is what parents are supposed to do, or mentors are supposed to do. They're supposed to make whoever they're mentoring really look forward to the future. So I want each and every one of us to think about in our past and even in our present, there are people in your life who try to make you just like think about the greatest gifts that you have and how to utilize them properly. I remember my mother used to always tell me, and if my siblings are listening in on this, mom loves you just as much. But like mommy, my mom used to always tell me that like you're a special child. Like you're not going to be like any other one, but that means you have to always do the right thing. Like she would like tell me things like that. I'm not sure whether she told that to my siblings, but I'm hoping she did. But there was, and that stays with me. It was like a random thing. I remember the first time I heard it when I was like 3 years old, but it happened pretty consistently. And like it stays. There's certain advices that people will give you that just stay with you for the rest of your life. Allah captures that in this story. And you don't know what impact they're going to have. So we have to be really mindful of that. But I'm going to continue on. He's going to teach you ta'wil al-ahadith wa yutimmu ni'matahu, and Allah will bless you with blessings, right? And saying that you're going to benefit from this. But then he also says, alayka wa ala ahli Yaqub. upon you and upon the children of Jacob. This is weird here because Yusuf alayhi salam is Yaqub is the one who's telling him this. Why is he referring to himself in the third person? The way I see it is, when Yaqub alayhi salam, this his own what's the term I'm looking for? His own desires coming out here, and that's totally fine. His dream is to be known one day as his children would call him Ali Yaqub. Because why? What do we always hear? Ali Ibrahim, which is Yaqub's grandfather. He's like, maybe one day people will say Ali Yaqub, Ali Yaqub. That's kind of beautiful. It's fine for parents to tell their children about their dreams. We're supposed to. The people who we mentor, you can tell them your dreams. That's totally fine. Why? Because he's like, maybe Ali Yaqub. And the other thing is, the wisdom in this, remember he already told his son that be afraid of your brothers. But in this case, he says, your favor is going to make you even awesome. Blessings upon your brothers too. Because again, he doesn't want him to be cut off from his brothers. Your brothers too. What Allah has given you, it can mend any problems you're going to have with this whole family. That's why Ali Yaqub is found. At least that's the way I see it. Is mentors can tell them about dreams that they have of their own, and also again repairing the relationship between him and his brothers. Kama, and this is the other part. Kama atammaha, like he completed. Now going to the past. Ala abawayka, to your parents. Min qablu Ibrahim wa Ishaq. Abraham and Isaac, attaching him to a legacy. That you're a part of something much bigger than just yourself. That creates purpose in a child when you have done what? And that's anytime you also do something like give someone advice, you want to connect to their past, you want to make them confident in like looking forward to the future, and you want them to have their present taken care of as well. And that's what Yaqub alayhi salam does, like your lineage. And he makes him proud of his lineage. Your lineage is amazing. Your grandfather, your great grandfather, think about what they have accomplished. And he just has to mention them, and Yusuf alayhi salam probably already knows their whole story completely. Why? Because there's talked about over and over again. This is I hope you guys do. If you guys don't know the stories of your grandparents and your great grandparents, ask your parents. Honestly, if you're wondering why don't I have motivation sometimes, it's because one of the reasons is I don't know my lineage. I don't know the stories of my grandparents and my great grandparents, whether they were Muslim or not. You can still benefit from their legacies, and you can carry on their legacies and raise their legacies. That's one of the greatest forms of motivation that a human being can have, is to understand that I'm going to raise, like, that's why so many cultures have this idea of ancestors, of like benefiting our ancestors or ancestors benefiting us. There's a human thing to that. That's half the motivating, half of it is going to be what occurred in the past. I want to do as good or better than them. And the other half is of the future. I want to make sure my future progeny is amazing. And that's captured within Yaqub alayhi salam's statements. Ale Yaqub, my future progeny, that's you guys and the people that came before me. His own desires and his own aspirations come out in his advice. Nothing wrong with doing that. This is an honest conversation between a father and a child. And an honest conversation, what happens? My goals get put out there too. Not just your goals. We're also going to talk about my goals. And I want my goals to live out through you. He's honest about it. And there's a bit of like that history lesson as well, making him feel like, oh, continue our legacy. You are a part of something much bigger than just yourself, and you're going to accomplish much more than just yourself. I'm going to conclude because I know we've hit our 7 o'clock time limit. Qablu Ibrahim wa Ishaq. There's a couple more lessons that I could bring in. Why does it start off with Ibrahim and then Ishaq, even though Yaqub was brought up first? Maybe I'll get to it later. Inna rabbaka alimun hakim. Indeed, all wisdom is from, all wisdom and authority belong with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why is that important? Because again, he doesn't want his child to become strong-headed. He wants him to appreciate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This advice started off with, Allah chose you, Rabbuka, and then ends with Allah as well. It's humility all the way across. Don't do this just for your ancestors. Don't do this just for yourself or your family. They're there. At the end of the day, it began with Allah and it ends with Allah. That it's going to be Allah. Because sometimes what's going to happen, your family won't be able to keep you in check. You're going to be away from your family. But who are you never going to be away from? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So make sure it's always connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the beginning and at the end of the advice. Just just think about what this does. This is the last conversation we have from Yusuf to Yaqub, or Yaqub to Yusuf. But this conversation allows Yusuf alayhi salam to do what? To get through. If there was anyone who could blame their environment for how bad they turned out, it would be Yusuf alayhi salam. What happened? And I want some. This is supposed to sting a little bit. Some of us say, I had bad company. My siblings were always mean to me. Okay. As much as we can appreciate that, Yusuf alayhi salam, did he grow up in a good environment? No, he grew up, some of his time was in a well, others was as a slave, others was in a house of a politician, others was in a prison. Do any of those seem like good environments? No. But apparently the education and the care and the simple words he received from his father gave him motivation to be an amazing person through all of that. Why do we appreciate that? We're afraid of facing the world. What the story of Yusuf Islam seems to capture is, if we do a good job telling people advice on how to face the present, making them look forward to the future, and attaching them to a brilliant legacy of the past, they can get through whatever situation you throw at them. That's one of the legacies of this part of the surah, in my opinion. Whatever trial you go through, Yusuf Islam will always have a goal to aspire to, will always have a legacy to maintain, and will have practicality of how to deal with the real world in front of him. That's what his father gives him in this brief conversation. I've been talking for a while. I'm going to be quiet now. Any comments, reflections, things that were going through your minds?
What part of it is just genetics and the fact that Yusuf alayhi salam was just like that versus he chose at every moment to be a good person?
What part of it is genetics? Allahu Alam. Was that the question you asked?
If the question is that some people are just born a certain way and some people have to actively choose at every moment to do the right thing. So what part of it was that he was just born a good person and it was easier for him to make that choice versus at every point he had to struggle with himself to make that choice?
Yeah, the best answer I have to that is Allah knows best, but I don't mean that in just the typical Allahu Alam. I actually mean that in terms of, this is what you and I will never know. Like, all we'll know is what we had to choose. And that's what we'll be judged by, because you're actually hitting on a very real like a reality, which is that two people, the same thing might happen to, but one person gets angry and loses their temper and the other person is patient through it. It could be, when all is accounted for, that the person who got angry actually reacted based on their capability in a better way than the person who was patient. Why? Because they were genetically predisposed to, that person never gets angry, versus this person gets angry all the time, but they tried to hold themselves back. They tried, but they just couldn't do it because they weren't capable. What is there to be had is, everything you're going to be faced with is going to be uniquely, this is like the ayah in the Qur'an, Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah talks about musibah. It is a guided target that hits you exactly how it was supposed to hit you. Your job was just how you were supposed to respond to it. So what part of it was it? Allahu Alam, we don't know. But what we do know is what happened to get the most out of you in that moment. And your job was to react. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
I was thinking about ayah 6, and I was thinking about, is this actually talking about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or is one of the meanings that you could take it as talking to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? But then I saw that your forefathers Abraham and Isaac, whereas I think the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's ancestors were Ibrahim and Ismail, or Ishmael.
Yeah.
So it has to be Yusuf alayhi salam then that's being talked to, right?
That's true, unless we view it in terms of not genetically. Because, oh man, I got to mention this just because I got this question a little bit ago, and the question was why the Prophet ﷺ came from the Ismail, like Ismail's line rather than Ishaq's line, right? Because all of the other prophets came from Ishaq's line. When we think about like Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, Moses, David, Solomon, John, Isa, all of those prophets, right? Maryam, Isa, they all come from Ishaq's line and not Ismail. And the prophet comes from Ismail's line. The answer I typically have towards that is um, Muhammad SAW actually gets to benefit from both legacies. There was one legacy there. Abraham is the father of nations, not just a nation, but nations. And he has one child who ends up being simple. What I mean by simple is his descendants are going to end up being Bedouins up until the Prophet SAW. Like they're literally what? They live off of nature. Do they form empires? No. What do? They live off of Bedouin. They live off of the land. And then you have another child whose descendants, some of them are kings, some of them are farmers, some of them are slaves, some of them are rulers of empires, some of them are like refugees. You have every type of experience under the sun with the descendants of Isaac. But with the descendants of Ishmael, what do you have? Bedouin, 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 Bedouin. Like that's all it is the whole way through. Prophet ﷺ gets to benefit from both legacies. The legacy of an empire, the legacy of all of these diverse experiences, which is from the line of Ishaq, and the simplicity of being connected just to nature and simple life. That's where our heritage comes from. Any other concluding comments or statements? And I'm hoping that made a little bit of sense.
Yeah, can I say something really briefly, inshallah? Yeah, so for I've been kind of suppressing this for the past 3 ayahs, but for from ayah 4, it was mentioned the beautifying aspect of the stars, and I just found it really ironic and humbling that Yusuf alayhi salam saw his brothers as the stars, you know, a beauty of sorts, when he was the one gifted with quote unquote half the world's beauty and a beautiful character as well. And
Wow.
that's such a humble thing on his behalf to notice. I mean, to, you know, view someone else when you are the one that has that. And then for ayah 5, I think Ryan touched upon this, but I really liked how immediately after saying, you know, do not relate your vision, first of all, that's such a perspicuous claim. It's very yes and no. And, you know, Yaqub alayhi salam knew his sons. But I really like how immediately after that he said Shaitan is the enemy, so as to kind of tell his son that, you know, your brothers aren't exactly to blame. They've succumbed to his whispers. And no one really talks about the brothers, you know, their redemption arc, because they did eventually apologize. After everything that happened, they prostrated, they realized they were in the wrong. And then for ayah 6, surely your Lord is all-knowing, all-wise. The all-knowing and all-wise kind of shows, that's just kind of indicative of what's going to happen to Yusuf alayhi salam, because Allah knows he's going to go through so many trials. So I just find it really interesting that those attributes were used.
SubhanAllah. Yeah, that's something that I've never heard of that. I think that's a beautiful connection to make. Those were beautiful connections to make. The last thing I'm going to conclude with today is going to be really corny. I said I'd make 2 comic book references, and I only made 1 so far. With great power comes great responsibility. The second one I want to keep in mind is, I'm assuming most of you have seen The Dark Knight Rises. And when Bruce Wayne thinks of his dad, he thinks of that one quote, which is what? Why do we fall, Bruce? So that we can learn to pick ourselves back up. And when does he see that? In his most difficult moments. When Bruce Wayne breaks his back and he's in that prison. There's going to be so many metaphors here. In a prison, he sees his dad. In a well, he sees his dad. So again, but when he's in the prison, he's broken. Bane broke his back. And he's hanging. What does he see? He sees his dad once again say, why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves back up. And then he ends up getting the courage to do whatever. Yusuf alayhi salam, this statement, وَكَذَلِكَ يَجْتَبِيكَ رَبُّكَ. I would imagine that's that moment for Yusuf alayhi salam. Why? Because every difficult thing that happens, he keeps seeing his dad saying what? And that's why Allah chose you. And this is how Allah chose you. And this is why, and so everything that's happening, Allah chose me. And I'm going to be bringing what? I'm going to be bringing good to my entire family. I know it. My family did something terrible. I'm in a well. Not going to lose hope. Why? Allah chose me. Allah made me uniquely qualified to go through this. And what? I'm carrying on the legacy of my parents before me. My grandparents before me. This is the legacy of Abraham. And I'm on the legacy of Abraham. His father gave him what he needed to get through every single moment. This is his, like, if we're there's a lot of guidance to be gotten in comic book or like superhero stories, but if we're talking about a superhero story, this is it. This is the makings of this superhero right here. When we talk about like where did they pick up that like amazing like memorandum like of understanding what gets them out of bed every morning, that type of thing. This is it. You know how we talk about what's basically the lesson of every the origin story of every superhero. My parents died in some tragic, terrible way. My parents were taken away from me in some tragic way, but the lessons they passed on to me stayed with me forever. Yusuf alayhi salam, we could argue, and all the other prophets as well, they're all superhero stories. And that's what we're reading, inshallah. We'll get into that the next couple of weeks. So with that, we'll conclude. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those that appreciate the lessons that our mentors have passed on, that are able to really think about in our past, what are certain times that our parents gave us such beautiful wisdoms, like Yaqub alayhi salam gave Yusuf alayhi salam in the Qur'an, that we appreciate them and we're grateful to them as a result, and we carry them with us in some of our most difficult moments. And we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be amongst those that when we are put in charge of people, of advising people, we're able to truly listen to them before we say anything. Just as Yaqub alayhi salam listened to his son Yusuf, because when we listen, we build trust with people, and then we respond in the best of ways, respond in allowing people to get through their current struggles, give them motivation to get through their future moments, and give them the confidence of understanding that they come from an honored past. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam.
Alaikum assalam.
Yo, Chaplain Kaser.
Yeah.
Yo, one thing, it's so wild that you brought up Batman, because I've literally been binging this like recently. And it's so wild, subhanAllah. Like Batman was literally in a well, like when he was a kid, and his parents like lift him out. It's so much synchronicities with it. It's so wild.
Ryan, you're going to appreciate this. I'm writing a book at the moment called Archetypes in the Qur'an. And a huge part of the book is analyzing or putting forward that every superhero story can be put down into 3 categories, just as every prophetic story can be put into 3 categories, and that superheroes are really the prophets of today.
Yo, I'm going to pick that up, inshallah.
I'll share it with you until I make some progress.
All right, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Chaplain,
Yes.
just real quick, I just needed a clarification.
Mhm.
It's obvious that Yusuf alayhi salam